Mr. King, would the defense like to make an opening statement at this time?
Thank you, Your Honor. Please the court, ladies and gentlemen, jury, counsel. Good afternoon again. I haven't yet spoken to you in the morning. I think I've said good morning to you. Yeah, not everything is a battleground. We had a nice long conversation yesterday about burden of proof, what you can expect over the next couple days, how it's going to play out. And as I just said, not everything is a battleground. We all agree that the police went out to the scene and the firefighters went out to the scene on November 15th, 2018. That's where it all starts. There's going to be some evidence that takes us back before that date, maybe some of the phone records, maybe some of the witness testimony, because obviously there are some relationships at play here. The three people who were in that home, Xavier Greene, Derek Archie, Haley Stone, they all knew each other. Everybody knew each other. It is true that Xavier Whitehead knew all three of those people. It's true that Corey Jackson, you just heard that name, he was living there as well. So there are four people living in this house on November 15th, 2018. That is true. You're going to hear testimony that Xavier Whitehead had lived there as well. So he knows Corey Jackson, he knows Xavier Greene, Haley Stone, Derek Archie. There are a number of other people you're going to hear about. In other words, as this case proceeds down this week a little bit, the cast is going to expand. It's not quite so simple as on November 15th, Corey Jackson wakes up and goes to work. Sometime after that, somebody goes into the house, shoots everybody, leaves, then comes back and burns the place down. It's not that simple. Because it's not this, okay, we have Xavier Whitehead. Xavier Whitehead is the person who did it. Therefore, we're going to focus our investigation on that, and that's where our investigation is going to end. We agree that this house is on fire. You can see that in the video. Isn't it interesting that there are some things that are obvious in the video? You'll see the flames sort of start out at the window and then become a little bit more intense, and the smoke will billow. Later on, firefighters will show up. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that that wasn't a fire. If it was not a fire, then it was a very good imitation of one that fooled everybody. You will see somebody going in and out of the house. Now, whether or not there was a fire doesn't require a whole lot of witnesses. If we have a video and we're looking at a video and there's the fire, then you can see what it is. It's obvious. But what is not obvious and what is not going to be obvious to you is who goes into the house in the morning and who goes into the house in the afternoon. That requires any number of witnesses from the state. Now, what's interesting is that one of the things that Mr. Schenka mentioned to you is that, yes, Mr. Wilkerson has taken a deal. You're going to see in the video a white Nissan Altima pull into the property at 6221 16th Avenue South. Now on this property, and you'll see it pretty clearly, there are two homes. One is a single family home. One is much larger than the trailer right next door. So you pull into the driveway and you'll see that there's a shed, then there's the single family home, and then there is the trailer where the fire takes place and these people die. Now another part of this case that is not a battleground is whether or not anybody has died. The first thing we admit is the multiple tragedy. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that whoever did this did so in self-defense. It's not that kind of case. I'm not going to say that somebody was standing their ground or defending themselves against some kind of felony. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stand up here and in any way justify the deaths of these 3 human beings. We know that they were shot. We know that they were shot in the head. We know that. We know that their deaths were caused at the hands of somebody else. It's obvious. We know that the house is on fire. So we admit all these things. And why does it get complicated? It gets complicated because at some point it doesn't become obvious. What is not obvious? What's not obvious is who did this. You're going to be asked to take all of this evidence and form an interpretation. As you heard Mr. Schenka say, we have people who know Xavier Whitehead. Well, they know Xavier Whitehead and they're going to identify him from this video. You'll see this video. You'll see the video. The video was simply downloaded from a security system and played to others. Played to others from a computer screen. Played to others perhaps from a television screen. It was never enhanced. You're going to hear people say, well, that's Xavier Whitehead because of the way he walks. That's going to be evidence in this case. The phone call between Corey Jackson and Mr. Whitehead is a matter of interpretation. Why is that? Because you are not going to hear in this phone conversation Mr. Whitehead ever say, I did it. If Mr. Whitehead is trying to convince Corey Jackson to come off of his identification of him because Mr. Whitehead is also saying he did it, then he would say so. One of the other things in the recording you're going to hear is Mr. Whitehead repeatedly say, I didn't kill anybody. What are you talking about? I wasn't there. I wasn't there. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. So what the state is going to be asking you to do at the end of this case is to give every bit of credibility or weight to Mr. Whitehead's efforts to convince Mr. Jackson not to identify him, but don't give any weight to the denial. Ignore the fact that he's denying having done anything, but give all of your consideration, your intellect, your common sense to simply his effort to tell Corey Jackson, don't identify me to the police. Now, there are some very interesting things about the recording you're going to hear. You're going to hear Mr. Whitehead tell Mr. Jackson, you know the way I walk. I'm not going to tell you to ignore any of the evidence. I'm not going to tell you to disregard those things. I'm not going to tell you, oh, that hurts me, so ignore it. No, I want you to hear all of it. Because all of it is a part of the interpretation. You decide what things mean collectively. You decide what the motivations are going to be behind people identifying somebody. We heard somebody during voir dire talk about accomplice testimony, didn't we? Somebody who does something because they want the benefit of something. They want a deal. So, Mr. Wilkerson is going to admit to you that he was an accomplice. He's going to admit to you that he was there for purposes of criminal activity of some kind. Because Mr. Wilkerson, you're going to hear this as well, was the first one indicted in this case for first-degree murder. Mr. Ricky Wilkerson, driving that white Nissan Altima, was the very first person in this case indicted for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Now, Mr. Wilkerson, since we're talking about common sense, we're talking about everyday interpretations of human behavior, he's going to plead guilty to that kind of conduct, but under no circumstances would he ever swear to tell the truth and then lie in order to avoid life in prison. There's a reason why we had the discussion yesterday about accomplice testimony. Because what makes sense? What is common sense about human behavior? And what is it that is required of Mr. Wilkerson to get the benefit of that bargain? Talk to you. He's got to sit up on the witness stand, swear to tell the truth, hoping that he avoids life in prison. Because the deal for Mr. Wilkerson, you're going to hear it, is 5 years, followed by 12 years probation, or 11 years probation. 5 years, followed by 11 years probation. That's his deal. That's what he gets for telling you that he drove Mr. Wilkerson or Mr. Whitehead to that scene. That's the exchange. That's the bargain for exchange. Mr. Wilkerson, if you testify, if you identify Mr. Whitehead as the person you took to that scene, you will not die in prison. No, no, no. You'll go to prison for 5 years. You're a young man. Who decides? So, all of the evidence can have it. Because when all is said and done, first you will decide whether or not there was a crime. You decide whether or not that fire was intentionally set. You decide whether or not the lives of those 3 people were unlawfully taken. You decide that. And then if you decide collectively that there had been crimes here, burglary, robbery, arson, tampering with physical evidence. Tampering with physical evidence would be going into the home for the purposes of destroying that evidence. A homicide, which would be the bodies. You've heard the charges. If you decide any one of those counts has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you decide whether or not Mr. Whitehead is the one who did it. Was there a crime? And if there was, who did it? That's it. And I suggest to you, after all of the evidence is put before you and you've considered that, you may decide that there were some crimes there. But it will not be sufficient, based on the credibility of these witnesses, to believe that Mr. Whitehead is the one who did it. And watch for the expanding cast of characters.